Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining this PRCA AI in PR webinar. This is one of a series of webinars that we're running on this topic. And there's lots of different reasons why we might talk about generative AI. It's a topic, that, you can't get away from at the moment, and it is and will continue to reshape the world that we live in. This webinar has been put together to address a rather serious consequence of AI, and that's the threat of misinformation and disinformation in the digital age. Now, as PR professionals, we play a critical role in safeguarding the reputation and promoting transparent and ethical communications. And today we've got a fantastic panel, and we're going to explore how AI is already aiding and abetting misinformation and disinformation, and actually on the flip side, how it can help combat misinformation and disinformation. And we'll talk about what the future looks like as this technology matures. In a moment, I'm going to introduce you to our really exciting panel and chair for this event. But first, a quick scene setter. So in today's interconnected world, information spreads at a really scary pace, often bypassing traditional gatekeepers such as journalists. We've got a journalist chairing today and researching millions within seconds. So while this is kind of revolutionized communication and access to knowledge, it's actually also creating an information ecosystem that is being polluted on a daily basis with misinformation and disinformation. Today, in times of conflict and in an era of populism, this is a concern for us all. And with significant elections around the corner coming in 2024, I think it's something that we need to be discussing and making sure that we are aware of as an industry. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to introduce you guys to our fantastic panelists. So first up, I've got John Harrington, who is the editor of PR Week. We've got Xiaomi Lin, who is the founder of Lin Global, and she is a big expert in this area, and I'm sure lots and lots of you will know Xiaomi. And then we also have Holly Mercer, who works at Logically. Holly, sorry, I've lost my notes. Do you want to just very quickly introduce your exact job title? Apologies.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm Holly. I'm Global Head of Communications at Logically, and Logically is a technology company combining AI and expert intelligence to tackle online mis and disinformation and online harms. And we work with social media platforms and governments.
Fantastic. Thank you, Holly, and massive apologies. And I'm Claire Williamson. I'm the chair of the PRCA Council at the moment, and I'm working with the Emerging Technology Group to kind of look at this, the challenges and opportunities that generative AI brings with it. So over to you, John.
Thank you, Claire. Sorry about that. You think I'd get used to how to use a webcam or video by now, but yes, appreciate it, and what a great selection of speakers we have, and what an important topic. So I'm going to dive straight in to the first question, which is one about definitions, really. Misinformation and disinformation. I think sometimes the terms can be used sort of almost interchangeably, but I don't think that's quite right. What are these different things? What is the difference between disinformation and misinformation? And actually, what does it mean for PR in practice? Xiaomi, could I come to you on this one, please?
Yeah, sure. So disinformation is the intentional proliferation of false information. And misinformation is the unintentional spread of that false information, often without malice or agenda. It's important because for misinformation to exist, disinformation narratives have to exist in such a way that they truly resonate with populations at scale, in a way that makes them believe them and share them. At Lin, we launched the Misinformation Cell 2 years ago, and it's since been at the cutting edge of translating academic research into actionable intelligence and advisory for comms, but also for policy and for risk officers. And it's great to see the growth in the conversation since then, and the fact that communicators are acknowledging it. I've been on God knows how many panels today talking about disinformation. That's really heartening. But I think we're still quite reactive in our response, and part of that I think is down to the fact that we necessarily as an industry don't understand how big the threat is and how we can actually address it. So we tend to focus on the bits that we can control around fact checking and, do we hide it, block it, delete it, all very, very valid questions. But I think we need to be much more proactive as Claire talks about rolling into 2024 and the biggest election year in history. As with inoculation, preventative action is far more effective and cost effective than being on the back foot, on being in a crisis. So I think from a PR perspective, this is timely, this is important, and this is something that we don't have a lot of time to get our heads around, but we need to move into a proactive space than a reactive space.
Great. No, that's really good message. And Holly, do you have any sort of particular thoughts on this question, on what's, what this means for sort of PR in practice?
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways ultimately that mis and disinformation implicates communications professionals, what with one being the information being spread and relayed about your organization or the organizations you represent, and then the other side of it being, using AI to actually put out information and content. So there's two ways. It's the use and actually the use against your brand and the brands you represent. And obviously they are things that have always been prevalent for PR and comms professionals, but the proliferation of AI has exacerbated that issue so much in the last year specifically. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I mean, it'd be good to sort of talk in a bit more depth really about the challenges that has been caused by the rise of AI mis and disinformation. Can anyone sort of talk about maybe some sort of specifics and some kind of reports that anyone has seen on this topic?
I'll just give a little context and hand to Holly as the expert in the room. But I think, the growth of AI is unprecedented. It's grown much faster than we thought it would. GPT-4 was meant to take a year and it was there within months. 4 or 5 days ago, custom GPT was launched, and we're seeing over 7,000 custom GPTs in action, which shows probably hundreds and thousands of customized GPTs in place to help the world move forward. So I think the pace at which AI is moving is exponential, and also the pace of disinformation is exponential. And rolling into an election year, which is the election year that will be 40 elections, 41%, 42% of global GDP, 41% of the world's population voting. The way we vote is going to make or break us as the world that we live in today. So I think that's sort of the context, but then I'm going to hand over to Holly.
Yeah, you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was also just about to say, I mean, it's, this problem of misinformation, disinformation, as you guys, as the experts on this well know, started well before AI. And I think the scary thing about AI is, like we're saying, the proliferation of these tools and the ubiquity of being able to create huge amounts of content at huge scale. Back in 2016, we saw, Facebook, Meta distort elections and throw out huge amounts of, right-wing misinformation. And I think now with AI, that it kind of blows my mind the scale at which that's going to happen. In 2020, the same thing happened. The balance was already tipping too far. And now I think, moving into 2024, it's a little bit terrifying. And I think as PR professionals, we really do need to figure out what skills we need to be able to kind of combat that. And also journalists as well. I mean, John, from your point of view, how can you trust what you're seeing, what you're receiving? And I think that role of journalism will also become more important for the world as the watchdog and the credible source of information.
Yes, and it's getting all the more challenging for journalists. I mean, I expect a lot of people in the webinar saw the news from Reach about 450 job losses. I mean, it's part of a wider picture of news desks being cut back, and also journalists being under more pressure to produce more with less. And the fact that there's a real temptation to cut corners and to just take things as read, particularly if you think it's going to get a lot of clicks. So I think there is a lot more pressure for journalists, and there's a lot more risk when it comes to what trusted publications are going to be reporting. Not a PR week, obviously. We research everything, but you know, it's just a fact of life at the moment. So I think there is a real extra responsibility there for public relations professionals to help journalists really in that regard. So yes, I'm going to move on from that, but it does come quite well into what measures PR professionals can adopt to sort of maintain credibility and trust, you know, when video and audio can be generated synthetically so well relatively easily, and deepfake becomes a growing problem. Claire, would you like to talk about this one actually?
Well, I think, I mean, again, I mean, there's all sorts of awful stories out in the press about deepfakes, etc. And again, it comes back to that issue of trust. Like, what can you really trust that you're seeing? And for me, as a, you know, sitting here with my kind of PR professional hat on, I think that, like you've just hit upon, that relationship between journalist and PR is going to be really, really important. Like, journalists are going to need to know that they are trusting real people. Those real people are the PRs. So actually that relationship, that symbiosis between the professions, I think from a PR point of view is a big opportunity for us to work with you guys to really support this tidal wave of, you know, information that is going to be, you know, out there spreading like wildfire. When you guys are, you know, as you said, John, less staffing, more pressure, etc., etc. You know, I think we need to work together, journalism's, PRs, even more closely moving into the future for the, you know, for the sake of the bigger picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Incidentally, I should say, feel free to put some questions in the in the system for us. I hope you're able to do that to everyone watching this. We've actually had a question coming from Richard Bailey, so I'm going to sort of, I think I'll probably ask some questions as we go along to sort of mix up between mine and the other questions that are coming in. So thanks to Richard. Any tips on debunking mis/disinformation while avoiding magnifying or endorsing the original rumor? It's a really good question, that, isn't it? Would anyone like to come in on this one?
I can definitely talk to that. So just to contextualize the company I work for, so I work for Logically, but we do, under the Logically brand, we have an independent fact-checking unit. And very much as part of the work we do for social media platforms, we do also have open the right for individuals of the public to come to us and have information fact-checked. You know, we are an organization that is working to tackle online mis and disinformation. So I'd say certainly reliance on fact-checking independent fact-checking organizations, specifically IFCN certified fact-checking organizations, would definitely be a route to go down for that.
Great, thank you. Anyone else like to come in on this, or if not, I can move on to
I think from our perspective, so I'm trying to find a question.
Yes.
I think where we start is with identifying harm. What is the real world harm that's happening as a result of disinformation, and working through that process through that lens and filter. I think it's important to identify that, because we often tend to look at disinformation through the lens of social media, and it's not solely social media. There's a lot of other spillover, and the spillover into real world is where we should be really concerned. Once we've identified harm, we can then understand what is noise and what the signals, to then help refine and define how we approach mis and disinformation. I think, you know, tech is very important in this. Tech is fundamental in the scanning phase of it, but the analysis of the intelligence, the interpretation of the intelligence, and then the integration of that into your response strategy, your communications programs, just like with media monitoring, has to be done through a human lens, and it has to be contextual to your bespoke space. So I think, you know, we need to ensure that that partnership is maintained.
Great, thank you. Moving on, I want to talk about ethics now. Given the risks associated with generative AI tools and the potential for disseminating false information, what ethical responsibilities should PR professionals consider when using these tools? Claire, would you like to come in on this?
I've made the mistake of being on mute. I think
no, I did it right at the start. So yeah, I'm glad it's not just me.
I'm off mute now. Good. Right. So generative AI, ethical considerations around generative AI are kind of quite far-reaching. You know, privacy, if you're considering using it for client information, making sure that you're not, you know, I've got a cybersecurity client, and we actually went out and did some research on office workers plugging in information that they wouldn't share in a pub with their friends to generative AI, and who knows who's behind reading it. You know, it's a black box. So there's that from an ethics point of view, but also, you know, there's, I think in the Oxford Dictionary, the word of the year is hallucination, and that comes from generative AI. And we've seen lawyers stand up in court with false you know, case law that they're, you know, arguing a case against, etc. I think we really need to have our eyes wide open to the hallucinations that generative AI can cause. Otherwise, we'll be littering the world with, you know, information that is false, and will only perpetuate the, you know, the potential problem of misinformation.
Yeah, no, very good points. Would anyone else like to come in on this about the ethics?
It's the same as behavioral science. So, you know, several years ago when I started talking about behavioral science, all the questions were around ethics. And I think, you know, it's the same questions now. And it's you know, science is what science does. It's what we do as practitioners, how we deploy it. It can be used for real good. It can be used to create, you know, a vaccine in a pandemic, or it can be used to create a nuclear bomb that can disrupt the planet. And I think with AI, whilst, you know, I personally focus a lot on the negative aspect of it, the impact on disinformation and how it's going to supercharge the further polarization of society. I think it's also important to acknowledge the responsible and ethical use of AI is extremely important and can really help enhance our practice, help enhance the work we do, and deliver on outcomes that we might have previously thought on, you know, impossible. You know, we've often talked about small teams, small budgets. Well, now with $20 GPT Plus subscription, you can be creating your own custom GPT. And, you know, you could be having an entire team. Indeed, if you look at, you know, our colleague in the sector, Andrew Bruce Smith, who runs Eshelman, and I'm sure we all know him, and he is chair of AI and PR for CIPR. He, I think, is the only practitioner in our industry who has a team of AI working for him. And it's fantastic to see how much he's actually helping that sort of application and experimentation into our industry and how this evolves further. So there's good and bad.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. Sorry, yes.
You know, I was just about to say, you know, any tool can be used for good or for bad, and yeah, ultimately there's always going to be bad actors out there. So it's just about, again, having your eyes wide open, and so that you can prepare. And I think, you know, Shani, you mentioned that, you know, making sure that you've got a response. And I think from again, when we're thinking about it from with our PR hat on, and, you know, being the protectors of reputation for brands, I think, you know, maybe we've all got to really look at our crisis comms plans now, and adjust them to adapt to this new world. And there needs to be you know, more consideration for generative AI and the harm that it could potentially do. You know, a CEO sat talking to somebody, you know, which is completely synthetic and fake, could cause a huge amount of damage.
Yeah.
I'm just going to come in on the back of that, Claire, because I do think at the moment a key conversation when it comes to AI and communications is how are we using it? How do we, you know, adopt it? But I think we mustn't lose sight of the heightened risk AI poses in terms of individuals leveraging AI generated content against a brand. I mean, we've seen the likes of Target, Bud Light, Kohl's in the US that have been subject to significant coordinated campaigns, and, you know, there is the potential that AI generated content will amplify the implications of campaigns like that. I mean, just to talk about some research, just to kind of set the scene of the lack of content moderation of these tools right now. We actually conducted some research a couple of months ago, testing a variety of generative AI tools' ability to generate election disinformation ahead of next year, and 85% of those tools actually accepted those prompts and created those images. And, you know, as you say, Claire, any tool can be used for good or bad, but I do think in an environment where there is currently no regulation and guardrails around generative AI tools, we as communications professionals have to be our own standard bearers in terms of, you know, how do we use this in a way that's ethical and moral? And we need to hold our organizations and the organizations we represent to the highest standard and ethics, really.
Yeah, no, well said. Question that's coming from Chris Lee. Thank you, Chris. Do you believe that PR agencies and practitioners should disclose how and when they use AI tools. Chris says, I've done on my website, but only for ideation and time saving, dictation, transcription, etc., not for generating content. Disclosure, it's a really good question. And there's been calls elsewhere in the industry for this. I think Ogilvy were sort of quite heavy on this point, arguing the case. What do you all think about this?
Shani, do you want to take it?
I think that's an interesting question. I think, you know, we've got some really good case studies in this space. If you look at Razor PR, who are an MNC Saatchi agency led by Dustin Chick, who sits on the PRCA board in South Africa, released an open source AI policy for the whole industry to use. They have integrated that in all their employee agreements and their client agreements, and it's available for anyone to use. Obviously, you've got to look at CIPR's AI and PR panel and see all of the research coming out of there. But I think fundamentally, it's about being honest to clients and honest to ourselves about how we're using AI. I don't think we need to tell clients about every piece of AI we use in our tech stack to get every single output to get to an outcome. But I think, you know, what we shouldn't do is claim fees for work that has been reduced by integration of AI. So I think it's a very mature conversation. I don't think we've got an answer, but certainly both the PRC and CIP are looking at how AI and the use of AI can be bedded in further into the code of conducts.
Yeah, I think just really quickly to add to that, we actually had a webinar with an IP lawyer from Lewis Silkin, who's the PRCA support from a legal perspective. And it was a big topic of discussion, you know, what do we disclose to clients, etc. I think when you're thinking about it from a brand point of view, who's communicating with customers, citizens, clients, you know, with the general public, I think it does need to be disclosed that it's generated by AI. You know, there's all sorts of things going on out there at the moment that people might believe are happening, like, I don't know, coats being put on. I mean, whether they believe it or not, I don't know, but coats being put on Big Ben as an example, you know, some people might stop and think that that's true. I think there needs to be a clear signpost to it. And I think from a client agency charter point of view, I think absolutely transparency is absolutely critical, and I think we can't claim work that generative AI has produced, but there are all sorts of grey areas around, you know, if you're inputting the information and prompting it, you know, is that then the generative AI's IP, etc., etc. It's a big topic that I think will continue to evolve, and we'll have to keep having conversations around it. Yeah,
no, good points. So the next question for me, as we inch closer to a time when technology can substantially distort our perception of the truth, you know, as depicted in The Capture on BBC, I don't know if everyone saw that. What are the implications for the PR industry, and how should we prepare? Perception of the truth. It's it's all quite Black Mirror, I guess. So we should sound like a cliche, but it's here in a way, isn't it? So who would like to talk about? I
think what we're all saying is that technology is moving at pace, and not in the not too distant future, we perhaps won't even believe conversations like this. You know, we already have synthetic voice modulation where, you know, someone can call and pretend to be your mother. It is moving at pace. I don't think we have answers. I certainly don't have answers, other than the fact that being, aware of it, keeping your finger on the pulse, and understanding what changes are happening both on a geopolitical and industry scale to be able to integrate those insights back into your program. But it is something to be aware of, and not, it's not going away. It's here to stay.
Yeah.
I think from my perspective, working for a brand that actually does face certain misinformation, disinformation campaigns about the work it does itself, I think a key piece of advice I would give is build communities of people, so that if you do come under attack, you have that network of people you can fall on, whether that's policymakers, whether that's media, whether that's wider influencers in the sphere you're in. I think having those connections and relationships to fall on if and when you are subject to a mis and disinformation campaign, that I can certainly speak to the fact that has been of significant help to me so far.
Good stuff. next question we've got from Valentine Morgan. What is your advice on how to respond if an organization is the target of a generative AI disinformation attack? Does it go back to controlling our own channels, or is there something wider?
Let's just be clear. Gen AI is not here creating disinformation attacks. The actual humans are the other end who are creating and organizing those attacks. And so that is what disinformation is. It is organized, it's sophisticated, it's monetized, right? So we should all, as practitioners, be prepared to be hit with an attack. If you've not been hit, you will be hit. And that's the reality. It's going to be at your doorstep, whether you like it or not. So I think it's better to be proactive, better to acknowledge it, better to prepare for it. Very similar to cybersecurity in the 90s, where we created scenarios. I don't believe that disinfo, whether that's Gen AI or not, certainly going to include Gen AI, is going to sit within the sole confines of communications. It's going to ladder up to strategy and risk if it hasn't already. So it's about ensuring that you've done your tests, that you've done your scenario planning, and you know how to be proactive in your approach when it does happen. And ideally, you're already building resilience and immunity within your audiences by listening to your information landscape and understanding what false narratives are out there about you and integrating the counter narratives to build resilience.
Good stuff. Thank you for that. So another question we got from Richard Bailey. Thank you, Richard. It's easy to get talked about on social media if you're willing to pick a fight or be an expletive deleted. PR as usual is becoming less effective because of media fragmentation and algorithms. Maybe someone argue with that, but fair comment. How do you induct new starters and give them a more optimistic and ethical stance as they learn about a challenging industry? Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? We want people to obviously be enthusiastic about this industry and not see everything as kind of doom and gloom and an uphill challenge. So yeah, has anyone got any thoughts on this? How to sort of, as Richard says, give them a more sort of optimistic way of looking at this challenge.
I'm going to be quiet for a minute. So I think it's between Claire and Holly.
Sorry, I'm trying to find the question.
Fair enough. Yes. It's under the Q&A bit rather than the webinar chat.
So I guess people coming in, how to give them a more optimistic view of the world.
Well, about the industry, really.
About the industry. Okay.
If I've got this right, Richard, you can obviously correct me if I'm wrong.
I think an optimistic view of the industry is that we can support brands, organizations, governments. I don't work for governments, but if if those that work in that area, we can be there as the guardians of trust and of reputation. And as Shayoni has said, kind of, in a couple of the answers, making sure that the resilience and the preparation is done. That's, that actually, in today's landscape with, everything that's going on, geopolitical, or the conflict, etc., we can come out and be the voice of reason and support the people that we work with to become resilient. And I think that that's actually quite an exciting challenge and an exciting opportunity for this industry.
Yeah, no, too right.
Ollie, you were
okay.
going to say something. We can disagree with me.
I was just going to say that I think we need to be confident, and I know that sounds slightly unrealistic sometimes, but I think we need to be confident in our abilities as communications professionals. At the end of the day, human interaction is not going anywhere anytime soon. And as more and more organizations and individuals take on, generating content with AI, we are going to need to find ways in which we can differentiate as individuals, as humans, whether that's building our knowledge, whether that's building our expertise. And I think that's the key thing is, an AI is an AI. As humans, we can also differentiate ourselves. And I'd say probably if I was a junior starting an agency, I would want to hear that. And, how can I differentiate myself as a human and the knowledge I have of the space I work in and the space my clients work in?
I'm going to say something and I'm going to start with an apology, John. But as juniors, when you come into this industry and, you know, you're pitching media, sometimes the journalists can get a little bit frustrated or irritated with, you know, with the PRs, rightly so in many cases. I think, again, if we're talking about what's the optimism, what's the, you know, the big takeaway of positivity from this, coming back to, Holly, what you're saying, we are people. AI is an AI, it's a bot, etc. I think that what this does now is make that relationship, I've said it before on this, I don't know what I was answering earlier, but that relationship between journalist and PR is going to be fundamental to you know, to society at large. So I think that that's quite exciting as well, and optimistic.
Yeah, yeah. Great. So do please keep sending all your questions in. Do really appreciate them. We've got sort of probably half an hour scheduled left on the chat, so lots of time to talk about various issues and get advice from our expert panel. I'm wondering if the industry and, you know, maybe society and corporations in general need to be stronger on social media platforms in terms of cracking down on mis and disinformation. Or do you think it's got to a stage where it's proliferated so much that it's actually unrealistic to think that the sort of Metas and Face and X's of this world have got much of a chance against the people who are using these tools? What do you think about that? Do you think we should be expecting more from platforms, or do you think that's just the wrong target, really?
I mean, being the person in the room whose client is Meta and TikTok, I should probably answer to this. I think there can always be more done. I think the key area in which we need to, platforms in particular, need to focus on is media literacy. I think that is the fundamental thing that, you know, there are people that do just take what they see on social media for face value. And I think there's responsibilities of organizations like mine in terms of educating the public on the examples of bad actors and the real harm that it's causing and why people do that, the intent behind that, but also how and where people can access information. So yes, I think platforms can always do more, but ultimately I think that media literacy is a key part of it. And I think journalists, I think platforms, and I think governments as well play a role in that.
Yeah, I think media literacy is a really interesting point. You know, I guess, without sounding patronizing, educating people to understand, you know, what doesn't look right or doesn't smell right, and where they should be looking at. You know, it's a bit like cybersecurity again. You know, you get a phishing email, what do you look for as part of that? A misspelled, you know, terrible grammar and funny URLs or funny email signatures, etc. So I think that there's probably a role to play there in terms of educating people what to look for, and if it doesn't smell right, then it probably isn't right.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm going to agree with everything that's been said. I would also add the fact that it's not just down to technology. I think the scale of disruption from disinformation is vast, and it's being used in ways that perhaps may not filter on the surface. And disinformation actors, due to the nature of the organized manner of carrying out this agenda and the sophistication behind it and the money behind it, you know, even with legislation, even with you know, platforms putting in place lots of different approaches, which we've seen platforms do in the past and hopefully do more of in the future, they are very, very clever. So platform swapping is a huge thing. You know, hiding in fringe communities is a huge thing. How are we going to monitor the whole World Wide Web, let alone the dark net, which has a lot more going under the surface? So I just don't think that sort of censorship on that, from that perspective, and I say censorship with quotation marks, is necessarily going to be an effective way of fighting this. I think we need to acknowledge it, we need to integrate it, and we need to respond to it. It's just one of those things that's here, and I don't think it's going away.
I think just to add onto that point, I think obviously we talk about the scale and sophistication of bad actors that are leveraging different platforms. There is actually, even prior to the vast adoption of AI, the organization I work for has been leveraging AI to tackle mis and disinformation for many years. And I think that's one thing to highlight, is actually, certainly as an organization, our view is the way of getting on top of AI generated content, but also more broadly disinformation campaigns, is leveraging AI tools to, one, you can do all sorts of things, whether that's look at coordinated influence across platforms. There's a variety of different ways. So I do think, while obviously it does pose threats, it is actually also a solution in many ways, just in terms of the scale of the problem. And we will only see further investment and development in that as well. You're on mute, John.
Sorry. I've got a big question now from Sarah or Sarah Jefford. Thank you for this one. Do you agree or disagree with Elon Musk's comment that AI may be the biggest risk humanity has ever faced? I think we could probably be a bit brief on this, but obviously it kind of relates to what we've been saying throughout much of this session. So who agrees, who disagrees?
It's a big question, and there's lots of cynical thoughts in my head about Elon Musk and who he is right now, but I don't want to be spreading misinformation, so I'll keep that to myself. I think again, with anything, it depends on how it's used, and I think there are bad actors out there. I mean, as the mother of a daughter, some of the stuff I've been reading about, what AI is doing with photos and things like that, I think it's, humanity is dark, and we have to make sure that we are monitoring and, addressing these challenges. Is it the biggest risk humanity ever faced? I don't know. Time will tell, I guess.
I think that the may in that is pretty significant in terms of if it's what regulation comes in. I think that's a key consideration. What are governments going to do about the problem? I think that's the fundamental. It's hard to make sweeping statements like that when ultimately there was the AI Safety Summit a couple of weeks ago. There was progress in regard to how the UK is leading that. I think ultimately that is very much down to that claim. It would be on the basis that there would be no regulation.
Yeah, I mean, talking of regulation, I mean, another question we got here from Salvatore Mertus. Apologies if I've mispronounced your name. Would you be in favour of a crackdown on AI generated content until legislation is sound? What are your thoughts on that? Is it too difficult to say when this might be, and actually we need to be more sort of proactive because we can't wait for the legislation maybe? Or do you think holding on for governments to sort of get their act together is a better solution?
I don't understand how you could crack down on AI or Gen AI without legislation. It has to, whatever, maybe I'm not understanding the question.
Could it mean by sort of kind of voluntary codes and that sort of thing maybe, or voluntary policing? I don't know.
I just think it's here. I just don't think that we can, escape it. I mean, we can bury our heads in the sand and that's fine, but it's still here. We are using it. We will use it. It is fundamentally changing lives and improving lives across the world. It is also disrupting lives, and that is the reality of it. And we just need to face up to it and come as an industry, come together with solutions and ways of working and operating within the space that can be monitored. And if it is violated, then that, just like with everything to do with code, has a consequence.
Yeah, I think that the horse has bolted, or whatever that saying is. It's done, it's there. We now have to figure out a way to make sure that on balance, there are the right guidelines that will, ensure that it's used for good and outweigh for bad. But, as Holly and Shoni have both said, there are always bad actors. So again, I think maybe thinking about it from a misinformation, disinformation point of view, there is some education to be done for everybody, whether that's the public, whether that's different industries, to make sure that we are all aware of what we should and shouldn't be doing and what we should and shouldn't be looking for.
Great, thank you. Another question here. Ursula von der Leyen, the President of European Commission, has talked about digital IDs. Possibly this is where trust and the eradication of bots will come from in social media. What are your thoughts about digital IDs? I guess the question was wasn't framed so much as a question, more as a sort of talking point. But I guess the question is, could digital IDs sort of help significantly in the sort of battle against AI dis and misinformation? Interesting idea. Anyone got any particular thoughts on that?
I guess just like passports, that it could probably be faked, and the people that are using generative AI for bad are going to find ways to get around that. So that would be my thought. I don't have a particular answer on it other than that thought.
Fair enough, thank you. Do keep the questions coming in. It's good to see quite a number. Richard Bailey again has got an interesting one here on media literacy. He says, my students don't see an issue with the Beckham Netflix biopic produced by the Beckhams. It feels like we're in a world where PR is won and not in a good way. Not sort of specifically about AI, but more about media literacy. I mean, but I guess there is a link, as a number of you have established. I mean, how bad do you think media literacy is at the moment? And do you think it's getting worse because of these kind of PR produced biopics and TV shows and so on streaming platforms particularly?
Somebody was talking to me about this the other day, and there's something else on. We've cancelled Netflix in our house because people were watching it too much. Not me. But there's something else on at the moment. Is there another celebrity that has got something going on, and it's much rawer, much more authentic? And I think people are still demanding authenticity. So I don't know, maybe there's a maturity thing with students, and I think people will still see through and see authenticity, and I think that's still a really important part of PR.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, so as I say, keep the questions coming along. Other things to ask about. I mean, we've obviously, there's been quite a few examples recently of mis and disinformation. I think what we haven't really done in this session so much is look at some of those very specific examples. Are there any kind of particular ones that you, the panelists, would like to sort of pick up on that you think were particularly egregious, and maybe think about how the people working in comms for that individual organisation might want to respond? Would anyone like to come in on this one?
I have an example that I definitely want to talk about. I don't necessarily have a response because it was so significant, but I mean, I don't know if everyone's familiar with the Pentagon deepfake that was circulating a couple of months ago. I mean, obviously, for those that know, the stock market dipped, and I think that, particularly as an organisation that's based in the US too and is tackling mis and disinformation, we had a team of analysts looking out the window at the Pentagon, out of our office window. And, they were then seeing these deep fakes online that were clearly deep fakes, but it caused such a significant impact in terms of the stock market. And I think, obviously, we don't necessarily always want to be talking about black swan events, but I think there are such significant examples where, it can have such significant impact on democracy. So don't necessarily have a suggested approach to that. I think ultimately the organisation coming out and saying that it's a deep fake immediately needs to happen. But I think that really does highlight the scale in which the impact, something that actually isn't that high quality, can have in real world.
Oh, John, you're on mute.
Sorry, what's that, third time today? Excuse me. So more questions have come through, so thank you for those. Shahina Danda is asking, How do you think the change in getting verification status on social media has contributed to the spread of mis or disinformation? Users typically associated a verified tick with reliability and trust, but now this status can be purchased by any social media user. That's interesting, isn't it? The end of the sort of effective end of the Twitter/X blue tick, and what impact that is having on trust, I suppose. Anyone got any particular
Really
thoughts on that?
interesting question, and it takes me back to the pandemic, which I know we don't want to relive. But if you remember the start of the pandemic, certainly in the UK, we were told that the virus was only harmful towards older populations and vulnerable parts of the society, audiences, and young people were fine. And then the Delta variant came along and changed everything, and suddenly young people were extremely transmissible. And therefore, when the vaccination program went from mass vaccine to priority to mass, with the expectation and hypothesis that we'd have higher take-up, we saw the reverse. I think it's a bit like that, where we've grown up. Certainly, many generations have seen many of our colleagues in the industry have seen the birth of Twitter, now X, and the introduction of verified, not being able to be verified, what that means, the status that it had in terms of signaling trust and authenticity. And now it's the flip opposite. So I think there is some education to be done to help audiences understand what that means. Also, I mean, X in itself, and I still call it Twitter, is changing at such pace. Is that going to stay? Who knows? So are we just seeing a little blip in the trajectory that is Elon Musk's X? No idea. But it is very similar to the whole vaccine piece that we engaged with.
And just to bolt on to the Twitter X conversation while we're here, is one thing we're seeing significantly is bad actors taking advantage of Twitter Blue, so the ability to monetize on engagement with posts. We have seen a significant rise in that in relation to the war with Israel and Hamas right now, and that is a real significant issue, is actually the ability to monetize on X right now.
Yes. Well, thank you for those. Worrying. Another question here from Lewin Pitts. Conversation is largely focused on content generated by AI, but as Shioni said, it's the malicious actors that pose an issue, and that remains unchanged regardless of how the content is created. What are some of the other issues that AI poses beyond content generation? An increased ability to target individuals or communities maliciously, thanks to rapid analysis of networks only made possible by AI, is one suggestion, or the question asks whether there might be other
I think
ways.
it's a very good question. I think rapid network analysis is certainly something that we now have at our fingertips. Increased personalizations, enhanced analytics, automated engagement, deep fake profiles in themselves. There's a lot in there that I think, in terms of the deployment of AI, that beyond the content we should really pay attention to and understand how that is circling our audiences and how that impacts then our organizations and objectives.
I mean, I guess it's still about content creation, but I guess the point is, with AI, it gives the bad actors the tools to very rapidly scale information. And as you said, it also gives the bad actors the ability to really tailor that content for impact based on individuals and personalization, etc. So, the issue is still the same, but it's that scalability of the issue and the believability, or if that's a word, that's probably not a word, I don't know, of the content that you're receiving. And also, you can write people's individual preferences, it's manipulating based on understanding people's individual preferences. Holly, you're on mute.
Sorry. I will just add to that as well, because we leverage an intelligence platform that is powered by AI. That does come to certain conclusions as a result of whether it's looking at coordinated inauthentic behavior from social medias across a variety of different platforms. And AI is by no means in a position where you can just take that assertion and run with it. For example, certainly some of the engagement we have with media in terms of shining a light on whether it's coordinated campaigns on social media, I would never take any data from our platform that hasn't been validated by a human. And I think that's one key as a tech PR is, yes, we can use insights to create stories and headlines from AI, but actually is a human validating that? And I think that's a key consideration that has to be considered as PR professionals as well.
Great, thank you. Next question here. How do you think we can educate young people on identifying AI-generated mis or disinformation campaigns without spreading fear of modern technology?
I would suspect that's moving into curriculum now. I'm not quite sure, but I would expect it to move into curriculum at the pace that we're talking about it. And it should be something that is taught both in the classroom and outside of the classroom in terms of industry induction for junior team members.
Yeah,
that's good.
Also for kids that are going through the schooling system at the moment, this is normal for them. Again, I have children and, they're all using it in some way, shape or form, whether they're meant to or not meant to. There's a bit of encouragement with using it. So I think, the kids that are going through the school system now will come out with quite a different skill set and understanding of this, much like we did with mobile phones and internet. And, internet seemed really scary at the time. And obviously it has created a lot of bad things in the world. But I think, as society, we're all a bit more aware of those things. So I think generative AI is just going to be part and parcel of life. I don't know if that answers the question at all. It's just
yeah, no, it's all good insights. Another question here from Bridley Davies. In the last few days, Bill Gates has talked about AI agents, which can act semi-autonomously to complete a whole complicated process from start to finish. And he thinks they're coming soon. Does the panel have a view on how this might affect the PR industry and jobs?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of unknowns at the moment. I think, again, it's kind of going a little bit off topic now in terms of the purpose of this webinar, but I think coming back to a lot of the points that have been made, it makes us hopefully a bit more strategic and a bit more necessary. So I think that the whole PR industry is it's already undergoing a change, and people are still figuring this stuff out. But there are definitely processes. I know, I run an agency. There are processes that we are already looking at automating. That does not take away jobs. It frees up those, the hours from the repeatable jobs like reporting, etc., to ensure people have the time to build relationships with journalists, and they have time to, think about how to join the dots between the brands and the news agenda, etc., which that creativity piece doesn't go away. Generative AI, it's not got the creativity. So I think it can be used as a really good thing to advance our industry.
Okay, thank you. Another question here. We're coming towards the end now, but there's time for probably one or maybe two more. From Sarah Osara Jefford again. Do you have any advice or guidance on how to leverage the effectiveness these AI tools can bring, but for all? So looking at inclusivity and digital accessibility.
I think it's about keeping your finger on the pulse on how it's shaping. And certainly with custom GPT, you could take and create your own GPT based on your own parameters. So if you feel like, and I think it's all about experimentation at this stage. It's about understanding what you want. I think, again, there's similar, can't speak anymore, similarities to measurement. I think it's about understanding what you want to achieve and then reverse engineering it. So start with your objectives and then work backwards to find the tools and solutions that will get you there.
Yes, thank you for that. So I think we might have time for a very quick last question from our people in attendance, and then one more from me. So Richard Bailey again, this is a very specific question. Would you agree with my wish to call Simon April Fool's Day stunts? Because how can we pose as good cop while reveling in creating brazenly fake news? Richard, you spoil sport. No more April Fools. How dare you? What does everyone think about this? Do we need to end April Fools?
I'm not in consumer, so I don't know. That's not a question for me, to be honest.
I'm not a big fan of April Fools, so I'll be happy if it goes.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. The fun police have won. I'm only joking. There's a genuine. I've certainly had my experience of difficulties with April Fools.
I can only imagine, John.
Yeah, some of the ideas that we didn't do. God, if anyone at some point listening to this wants to buy me a few drinks, and I can regale some of those. But anyway, let's not go on to that. I'm going to ask a final question, but before I do, thank you to everyone for taking part and for all of your questions. I think they've been really, really good, and it's been a great conversation. So the final one from me is quite a simple one, really. To the three panelists, can I ask you all to suggest one or maybe two proactive steps that PR professionals can play in the fight against misinformation or disinformation in the age of AI? What would be the sort of one or two points that you would put above anything else? Who would like to go first on this?
I'll go first because I've got a bad throat and I'm flagging. Understand what harm disinformation causes, identify and specify that, and ensure that you're looking at the whole range of responses without just focusing on one pathway. So just not focusing on, for example, pre-bunking over fact-checking or fact-checking over debunking. So ensure that you've got a wide range of tools to do it. Be proactive. Don't be reactive. Don't expect it not to hit you, because it will.
Great, thank you. Claire?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was going to say the similar thing, but not as eloquently put. I think it's that proactivity and that, making sure that the brands that you work with have scenario planned, they've built in resilience to their processes, etc. around this. And second thing, don't willy-nilly use generative AI tools and take it as gospel that what they're creating is correct, because then we're fueling misinformation.
Very good advice. And Holly?
I have 2 points because I can't get it down to one, and I think they're important. I think the first point is remember our responsibility to provide accurate and trustworthy information, regardless of the use of AI or not. I think there is such a light on our industry to be matter of fact and accurate with the information we're putting out in the public. And the second is what I said to one of the questions, is have confidence in our ability as communications professionals. I mean, there is a lot of chaos, but there is certainly potential to elevate the role of comms and PR to navigate the chaos. AI can't do that, and human interaction is still and will continue to be ever more important. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Agree with that. And at that point, I think we're just about out of time. So thank you again to everyone who took part for all your questions. And thank you to your nice comments that I see are coming in about the panelists and about the session. I'm glad you enjoyed it. So that's it. Thank you, obviously, to our panelists, Shoni, Claire, and Holly, and to the PRCA for setting this up. And I wish you a wonderful evening.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much, John. Bye.